For years, I've railed against the Blue Yeti microphone.
And now, a look at this week in podcasting news. It's the Jag Show Podcast.
When I consult a podcast from the jump, I always recommend solo podcasters get the Samson Q2U or ATR 2100X microphones. But occasionally, I consult clients who have already bought the Yeti, and they may not be able to return it, or they're on a tight budget. ThePodcastHost.com has a great review of the Blue Yeti, and it echoes many of the things I've been saying. Essentially, if you have a Blue Yeti, it's best for solo podcasts. The settings to record multiple guests aren't ideal. And most importantly, position the Yeti so you're talking into the side of it, not the top of it. And if you're not sure, plug in headphones and listen to yourself. Link to the podcasthost.com article in today's show notes. I've spent a lot of time in this podcast bemoaning the downfall of radio. In its pre-internet heyday, radio DJs broke new artists. Even 10 years ago, my program director here at Channel 955 in Detroit, Michael McCoy, broke local artist Mike Posner when he heard Cooler Than Me on a mixtape. Now, most new content seems to come from YouTube, TikTok, etc. But podcast guru Tom Webster thinks once we figure out music licensing in podcasts, podcasters will be next to break new artists. Imagine what someone like Mistress Carrie in Boston could do with her show. Also, Webster and his wife Tamsin are doing a webinar next week on making your podcast pitchable. You do have to subscribe to his newsletter at tomwebster.media for access to it. It is free, though, and a link to this week's article is in today's show notes. Speaking of webinars, the folks at Podfest are doing one for $10 on best practices using Facebook ads to grow your audience. Now, I've seen mixed results on this strategy, but maybe that's my problem. I didn't really have a blueprint. The webinar is Tuesday, December 14th, Eventbrite link in today's show notes. Naming your podcast is important. It needs to be found easily by both Google and actual people. You want something searchable but unique. Before you name your show, search to see if there are other shows with the same or similar names out there. Pod News has a nice article on the 100 most popular podcast names. It's a good deep dive. OnlyPod.com has a new service that will create a universal link for all things related to your podcast. Seems like a good idea until you click and see it's $49 to buy one. There are tons of other smart link services out there, and the best way to market your show is with its own website, even if you use a service like podpage.com. Next time, I'm doing a special episode of this podcast where I'll compare audio between Zoom, Skype, Riverside, and Squadcast. Until then, stay healthy and stay safe. Later.
If you like what you just heard, share The Jag Show with someone else who's interested in podcasts. You can also follow The Jag Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For help creating or improving your podcast, visit jagindetroit.com.